when we talk about economic development, is that the route that we will now use to liberate the continent of Africa from the chains of sorrows and lamentation. But even before I talk about that, I want to talk about the thing that is called governance. What is governance? Because governance is at the very heart of how we conduct our affairs. Today, many African countries have been made to believe that there is something called democracy. And listen to my choice of words, something called democracy. Who defines that democracy for Africa? Paris does so. London does so. Brussels does so. Washington does so. The conceptual West does so. After the many coups that took place in Africa in the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we were told that the only thing that will liberate Africa from dictatorships is democracy, and this is how they define democracy. You must have many political parties, multi-party democracy. Once you have had multi-party democracy, you must have periodic elections after 5 years. And once you have had periodic elections, your presidents must have a limited term. And after they have had a limited time, you must have a free press. And after you have had a free press, you must have the civil society. And when you conduct your elections, call in observers. The observers will come from Africa. They will come from Asia, but the opinion of the Asian observers don't matter. The opinion of the African observers don't matter. The opinion of the European Union matters. When they say the elections were free and fair, then they are free and fair. And if they did not say they were free and fair, then they are not free and fair. I want us to look at Africa after the reintroduction of democracy as defined for us. Here in Nigeria, after every election cycle, whether you like it or not, the country is never at ease. In Kenya, after every election cycle, whether they are successful or not, the country is never at ease. In Uganda, the country is never at ease. In Burundi, the country is never at ease. Democratic. They never tell Bahrain that they are not democratic. They never tell Oman that they are not democratic. They never tell Brunei that they are not democratic. But they are so quick to tell us what to do. The net effect is that in many African countries, when there is an electoral process, the participants in the electoral process are sometimes mere puppets, and the puppeteers are sitting outside of Africa. And we are fighting proxy wars. I say this because our systems of governance is what will inform economic development. Let us now ask ourselves, what is this thing called economic development? But before I go to that, let us look at the international architecture of governance. First of all, we agree that in 1945, when the United Nations organization was being put together in San Francisco in the United States of America, the many African countries that we know today were not there. It is their colonizers that were there. What is never lost on me, that after 1945 in San Francisco in the United States of America, about 3 years later in Paris in 1948, they came with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the same year that they came with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is when the apartheid regime in South Africa was being founded, and European powers did not say anything about it. It is not lost on me. It is not lost on me that is in 1945 that they came up with a structure which say that you have certain permanent members of the United Nations. and that those permanent members, the vote of one of them can neutralize the votes of all African countries. It is not lost on me that when the United Nations meets, you have a meeting of all nations which we claim are all equal. But if the United States vetoes, then that is the end of the matter. If the United Kingdom vetoes, that is the end of the matter. So the 1 billion of us, with our 54 heads of state, we can say all we want, but little France can neutralize them with a single vote. That is the architecture of the international world. And when the G7, I do not know whether you have ever seen, and I know you have, when there is a meeting of the G7 in the recent past, they invite leaders of African countries. Nigerian president is normally invited because you are the most populous nation on Africa, and 1 in every 5 African is Nigeria, and therefore you are a big market, so they invite your president. They also invite the chairman for the time being of African Union. And then they take a photograph. After that photograph, our leaders disappear. You never hear about them. And yet there is another meeting of the G20. Once again, you discover that we are not there. In other words, the architecture of the international economic order does not take care of Africa, which means that we are orphans in international affairs. And if we are orphans in international affairs, it begs the question, what is it that we must do in order to immunize ourselves from the activities of our erstwhile colonizers who still control the economy of the world? Let us look at economic development today. All African countries combined last year, our GDP at the very best was no more than 2 trillion United States dollars. The GDP of the state of California was $3 trillion. The population of the state of California in the United States is slightly under 39 million. It means that the 1.2 billion of us, all the goods and services that we generate in 1 year is still less than the 38 million generated by the 38 million citizens of the state of California. We are divided, we are so weak. And it is because of our weaknesses that we cannot do well. Look at our currency. Africa has nearly 32 currencies. Here in Nigeria, you have the Naira. In Ghana, they have the Cedi. When you carry your Naira to Ghana, the Ghanaian market woman will ask, what is this? When you carry your Cedi to Liberia, the Liberian Baba will ask, what is this? But when you carry the almighty dollar, they will quake in their boots. All our currencies are soft currencies, because if they are hard currencies, all the others must be soft, because the opposite of hard is soft. How can we compete in the world? Nigeria produces oil and exports most of it, only to re-import a lot of it. How can it be? How can it be that when we are exploring oil, it is ExxonMobil, it is Shell, it is Total, it is Elf, it is Tallow that takes care of our oil? How can it be that we produce gold and our gold is traded in London? How can it be? How can it be that we have diamond in Sierra Leone, and we have diamond in Botswana, and diamond in Namibia, but the price of diamond and the quality is determined in Antwerp in Belgium? How can it be? How can it be that we produce coffee in Kenya and in Ethiopia, And yet it is Nestle in Switzerland that produces Nescafe. How can it be? How can it be that we produce tea in Kenya and in Uganda, but it is the English who talk about the English tea and not a single bush of tea grows in England? How can it be? I say all these because economic development means value addition. We can only begin to grow economically when we are talking about value addition. What value do we add? You know, in the recent past, excuse me if I'm paranoid, but paranoia is part of the solution to the African problem. In the recent past, I've seen African heads of state being called to Japan by the Japanese Prime Minister to talk about the place of Africa in Japan's economic agenda. Then I've seen them called to Beijing in China. Then I've seen them called to Dubai in the Arab world. Then I've seen them being called to Sochi in Russia. Then I've seen them being called to Germany last week. What is it that people want from Africa? Why is it that Africa is so attractive? Do people love us so much that there is a competition for us? Yes, they love us so much. Because we are the bees that have the honey. But does the bee know how sweet the honey is? I suspect that we do not. How is it that our young men and women are running out of the continent, but if you travel to any African country today, there are young Chinese between the ages of 20 and 35 coming to Africa. There is not a single country that I know today that will not talk of a road that is built by a Chinese company. If it is not a road, it's a stadium. If it is not one such as that, then you have a Chinese restaurant, which the middle class think is a sign of success. Economic development is what I'm talking about. If I look at Africa today, the world is talking about the fourth industrial revolution. We are talking about robotics. We are talking about artificial intelligence. We are talking about the Internet of Things. We are talking about Facebook. We are talking about Signal. We are talking about Instagram. We are talking about cryptocurrency. We are talking about all these things, but where is my beloved Africa in the scheme of things? Where are we? Do we produce a single mobile phone? No, we don't. Do we run any internet marketing tool? We don't. Jumia was founded here in Nigeria, but by French entrepreneurs with a sprinkling of Nigerians. Half of it is now owned by MTN. So we shop from Jumia, we are told that is Africa because it has an African name. We are losing out. We lost out in the first industrial revolution. We lost out in the second industrial revolution. We lost out in the third industrial revolution. We are losing out in the fourth industrial revolution. So as I said at the beginning, we now humor ourselves by saying that those who built the pyramids were African. So what? It is good to humor ourselves with that history, but I'm talking about food on the table now, not the Sphinx in Giza. Africa will only realize her economic development if she begins to move in the right direction, which is what brings me to the last question of my conversation with Africa. Where is Africa going? And is she going anywhere at all? Yes, she is. You know, when I look at Africa, the colonial powers designed the post-colonial African state to fail. That was the design. That is why here in Nigeria, while the North was being administered separately with the South, on the eve of independence, they were put together in the hope that it would collapse. You have defied it. Nigeria is still alive and well, our trials and tribulations notwithstanding. They did the same in Sudan. Administered separately on the eve of independence, they put it together. Unfortunately, it did not stay for long. In the year 2001, it was split into South Sudan and Sudan. The colonial state was designed to fail. But over 50 years after independence, we have managed to weld our countries together so that we have some kind of diversity. And that is why I can still hear Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere, through the vicissitudes of time, say, we inherited artificial boundaries, but let us not redraw them. Because if we start redrawing those boundaries, which country will not be at conflict with each other? Let us only unite. And that is how I understand where Africa is going now. In the year 2013, African states met in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And they were celebrating 50 years after the creation of the Organization of African Unity. And I remember the chair of the OAU then was Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. She wrote an imaginary letter to Kwame Nkrumah, telling Kwame, you are right and we were wrong. 50 years ago, you told us to unite. We did not unite. 50 years ago, you told us that we should trade as one united country. We did not. 50 years ago, you told us that our safety would be guaranteed by our unity and unanimity on the things that affected the continent, but we did not. Today, we have recognized our mistakes and we are saying what the Catholics would say on a confession, mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. And having said that, we come up with Africa Agenda 2063. Africa Agenda 2063 is a promise to you, our founding fathers. A promise that if we lost the last 50 years, we'll not lose the next 60 years. And not in so many words, but in effect, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was saying, in the next 50 years, by 2063, Africa will be industrialized. There'll be an equivalent of the Silicon Valley in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Africa will have anchors in the west of Africa. Nigeria, the sleeping giant, will be alive and awake, and ECOWAS will not be the same again. In Southern Africa, South Africa will have shaken the vestiges of apartheid, and she will be the anchor of SADC. In East Africa, we will have Kenya and Ethiopia as anchors, and Tanzania will also make a contribution. In Central Africa, that country that is bigger than the entire Western Europe, the Democratic Republic of Congo, will no longer be a basket case of the world, but she will be the food basket of Africa. And that power will be generated from the Inga Dam. Down in Namibia, solar power will be harnessed. In the Maghreb, the Arabs will have been persuaded to determine that the Africans are not to be Africans when it is convenient and Arabs when it is inconvenient. And that therefore Africa will become a continent that we can speak of. Africa Agenda 2063, in my view, are the first baby steps which herald a realization by Africa that Africa can only unite if she speaks with one voice. There are those who are beginning to question whether Africa Agenda 2063 was dead on arrival, and before they could say, yes, indeed, Africa met in Kigali, Rwanda, and came up with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And I'm happy that under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the Secretariat is already being established in Accra, Ghana. And from the month of June next year, Africa Continental Free Trade Area will begin to operate, and Africans will begin to trade with Africa. And when that begins to happen, it will no longer be necessary for the border between Nigeria and Benin to be closed at Sem. It will not be. It will no longer be necessary to close the border between Nigeria and Ghana. It will no longer be necessary to close the border between Rwanda and Uganda. It will no longer be necessary to close the border between Kenya and Tanzania. It will no longer be necessary to close the border between Zambia and Botswana. It will no longer be necessary to control the border between Lesotho and South Africa and Eswatini and South Africa. Africa will be trading as one. Will these things happen in your lifetime? Perhaps not. So this is not for the faint-hearted. This is not instant coffee solution. Our duty is to do what we must and to run the relay race that like it must be run. You run your leg well and hand over the baton to the next generation. It can be done and it will be done, because if it is not done, Africa will not realize our potential. But even as I say what I am saying, wisdom demands that I must now move to the conclusion of my conversation. And that wisdom tells me that in Africa today there are two categories of people. There are the Afro-pessimists and there are the Afro-optimists. The Afro-pessimists are the ones, if you permit me to use this cliche, whenever the glass is half full, they will always say that the glass is half empty. The Afro-pessimists are the ones who will always say, as somebody once correctly said, for every solution they find a problem. I want to declare here and now, I am an Afro-optimist. And I'm encouraging us to be Afro-optimists. And when you are an Afro-optimist, you are in good company. When you are Afro-optimist, you are in the company of many good men and women. When you are an Afro-optimist, you are in the company of Kwame Nkrumah, because he believed that Africa could realize our potential. When you are an Afro-optimist, you are in the company of Julius Kambarage Nyerere. I remember so very vividly on the 6th day of March, 1997, when Julius Kambarage Nyerere had been invited to speak in Accra, Ghana, and he was speaking on the subject of African unity. He said, inter alia, that I come here to confirm that Africa can only grow if she is united. And it pains me when I see that we little countries are putting premium on our Ghanaian-ness, our Nigerian-ness, and our Tanzanian-ness. In the scheme of things, what is Tanzania? In the scheme of things, what is Nigeria? In the scheme of things, what is Ghana? In the scheme of things, what are our little countries? He says that the beauty of Africa is that the rest of the world still treats her as if she were one. And she reminded his audience that if Africans are going to commit any sin, the sin that they must not commit is the sin of giving up hope. I'm an Afro-optimist in the nature of Julius Kambarage Nyerere. I'm also an Afro-optimist in the class of the man for whom I am named. Patrice Emery Lumumba died at age 36 when called upon to write a letter to his wife. He had 2 wives, 2 of them, 4 wives in fact. 2 of them had the same name, Josephine. So when the letter was released to Josephine, they were jostling. Was it Josephine number 1 or Josephine number 2? But that does not matter. The letter was written and he said, I know that I'm going to die, but my joy, even when I die, the Congolese and the Africans will now write their history and their story. I'm an optimist in that regard. But I'm also an optimist a lot more with due respect to the economic circumstances of the continent. I'm an optimist who believes, like the young Ghanaian economist writer Dambisa Moyo, that Africa will only rise if she does not look at aid as the solution to our problems. I'm only an optimist in the class of Dambisa when she warns us that China and India and the West have appetite for our resources, but we cannot blame them. We must blame ourselves, because in the nature of things, we must trade with China, we must trade with Europe, we must trade with America, but we can only trade from a position of strength. I am an optimist like my own fellow countryman, Professor Calestas Juma, who in his book, The New Harvest, says, we can only feed ourselves if we begin to embrace innovation and invention. I am an optimist who believes that Africa can rise, Africa will rise, and Africa can rise. And I'm an optimist who believes that those of you who are present here are the ones who, in the nature of things, must now embrace what I call the Holy Spirit of economic development. This, in a manner of speaking, is the day of the Pentecost. And I'm now saying, let the Spirit fall upon us. Let the Spirit invade our hearts and minds. I started at the beginning by saying that I was preceded in these lectures by great men. I was preceded by Benoit Boueze. And when he spoke about constitutionalism. Let constitutionalism have meaning when we talk about governance, and I think that it will have meaning. I was preceded in this particular regard by Ali Mazrui when he talked about democracy. Let democracy be defined by us. I was preceded by John Aelaigu. I was preceded by Professor Utom, and I was preceded by Kingsley Mohalu. I was preceded by great men. And I am in the presence of great men who believe that we can solve our problems of governance, we can solve our problems of insecurity, we can solve our problems of poverty, we can solve our problems of economic underdevelopment, and we can only do so if we embrace the things that change nations. Let us today do so. God bless.